This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Haba and welcome everyone. Shalom Aleichem to the Koilel Agra de Pirka. Here, a national share now. Welcome everyone. Great to see everybody. Some important announcements. This evening we begin Meseches Kesubos in the Daf HaShavua. The shir is 9:15 Monday and Tuesday evenings. It is a live shir in our shul 530 Peninsula Boulevard. It's on Zoom. You could catch it at RabbiDG.com. We have a very beautiful chabura. We reviewed on Shabbos. There's an Eon shir Sunday morning at 11:15 a.m. We're Be'ezus Hashem completing the Sefer on Shemois. If anybody would like to participate in the Sefer before the new year, please contact us. It will be very appreciated. Okay, this is our last year before Rosh Hashanah. Let me take the opportunity to wish everybody Eksiluch Sima Tova, Agut Gebench. We appreciate your participation, and everyone should have good health. All your tefillah should be neskabel. You should have nachas from your family, from your descendants. You should have shalom, parnasa, v'mali Hashem kol mashalis libchem l'toiva, agut gebench yar. May Hashem give us siyata d'shmaya to learn together in simcha, ad bias gal tzedek. Today we're going to speak about a really unusual topic. You know, something really out of the box. Okay? Rosh Hashanah is coming, so get a load of this. We're going to talk about the mitzvah of Shofar. Yes, I know it's a very creative subject, but you know, sometimes we have to do something a little out of the box. So, let's talk about the great mitzvah of Shofar. We begin with the comments of the Smag, Mitzvah Membes, the Smag Rav Moshe of Kusi. By the way, Rav Moshe of Kusi is the author of the Tosfos Yeshonim, a Masechta Yuma. And Rav Moshe of Kusi writes, Mitzvahs Aseh Litkoya b'Shofar. There is a positive commandment to blow the Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Shenemar Yom Teruah Yeh Lachem, a day of Teruah it should be for you. Likewise, in the Shiltos of Rabbi Chaim, Rabbi Chaim had a son that did not want to learn, and therefore he was a trailblazer, and he was from the first to start to write halachos based on the order of Chumash. And in Shilta Kuf Ayin Aleph, the Shilta says, Mechayvin Beis Yisrael lemiska b'chat sortzra b'chad b'tishrei. It's a mitzvah to blow the shofar. Now you say, of course it's a mitzvah to blow the shofar. Well, wait a second. Comes the Rosh, and the Rosh takes us even further. The Rosh quotes Rabbeinu Tam, who we've mentioned is the greatest of all the Rishonim. The Rabbeinu Tam wrote that the bracha, the correct bracha to make on the shofar, if the Smag is saying there's a mitzvah to blow the shofar, if the Shiltos is saying there's a mitzvah to blow the shofar, comes the Rosh quoting Rabbeinu Tam, and he says the correct bracha then to make on the shofar is Ashar Kiddishanu b'mitzvah b'tzivanu al tekiah shofar. Why? Because making it is the completion of the mitzvah. Interesting. So we have Rishonim that say the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. Ad kedei kach, that the Rosh quotes Rabbeinu Tam, that the correct verbiage to use when reciting the bracha is al tekiah shofar. However, the Rambam could not be more emphatic in terms of articulating that the mitzvah is not to blow the shofar. I heard from Rav Yonasan Sachs, the Rosh Shiva of, I believe, Beis Medrash LaTalmud of Landers, and the Rav of the Agudah Pesach, and he writes this in his Sefer Yom HaZikaron, that the Rambam writes in no less than 7 places that the mitzvah is to hear the sound of the shofar, not to blow the shofar. So the Rambam in his Koiseres on Hilchos Shofar writes, L'shmoya koil shofar be'echad b'tishrei, to hear the sound of the shofar on the first day of Tishrei. Okay. Furthermore, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Shofar Parak Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Mitzvah Saseh Shel Torah, Lishmoya Truas HaShofar. The Rambam writes that this has halachic ramifications. Namely, what is a halacha if somebody steals a sukkah? Sukkah hagezula, pasol, it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. What if one stole tefillin, la yatsa? One stole tzitzis, la yatsa, it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. However, what if somebody stole the hammer with which he built the sukkah? Okay, then he'll be yotzei. Why? Because the hammer is not the chefza shel mitzvah. It's not the item with which one fulfills a mitzvah. The hammer is merely the tool which constructed the chefza shel mitzvah. Likewise, says the Rambam, if someone stole a shofar and blew it, you're yotzei. Because the mitzvah is not to blow the shofar. The mitzvah is to hear the sound of the shofar. And the koil, the sound, is the chefza shel mitzvah. And you can't steal a sound. So here again, in the third place, the Rambam articulates, the mitzvah is not to blow, the mitzvah is to hear. Likewise, in the Parak Beis, the Rambam says, everyone is chayiv to hear the sound of the shofar. The Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvah Kavayin, the 170th mitzvah, we are commanded to hear the sound of the shofar. The Rambam has a minyan ha-mitzvahs katzar. He says, lishmaya, in his list of mitzvahs that everyone has to do, lishmaya. And then finally, an eighth time, and this is my humble addition, the Rambam in his Tshuvos Pe'er Hadar, Siman Nun Aleph, the Rambam writes, what's the chiluk between lishmaya kol shofar and tikiyah shofar? The Rambam says there's a very big difference. He says the mitzvah is listening. If the mitzvah was to blow, then every individual would have to blow. You can't go to shul and say, oh, Baal Tekeh, could you blow for me? Would you mind putting on tefillin for me? Would you mind sitting in the sukkah for me? You know, I'd really like to go to Europe for sukkahs. So do me a favor. I don't want to go to one of these Jewish programs. They're much more expensive. I'll go on my own. And I'll appoint a shliach to sit in the sukkah. I'll appoint a shliach to take the daled minim. No, mitzvah shebegufay, a mitzvah that's incumbent on your body. You got to do it yourself. You can't appoint a shliach. You got to sit in the sukkah yourself. You got to take the daled minim yourself. You have to wear tefillin yourself, and you have to. So then, why don't you have to blow shofar yourself? If the mitzvah was to blow, you would have to blow yourself. You know why you don't have to blow yourself? Because there's no mitzvah to blow. The mitzvah is to listen. Now, what would the halacha have been if somebody went into a pit or put in earplugs? Let's say someone put in earplugs and he blew the shofar and he couldn't hear it. Well, if the mitzvah was to blow, you would be yotzei. But now that the mitzvah is to listen and not to blow, one is not yotzei. But since the mitzvah is to listen, if somebody did not listen, they would not be able to be yotzei. And just like a sukkah, the mitzvah is to sit, and by lulav, the mitzvah is not to tie it, but to shake it. By tikiyah shofar, the mitzvah is to listen and not to blow the shofar. And comes the Avnei Nezer, and the Avnei Nezer explains that based on this idea of the Rambam that the mitzvah is to listen to the sound of the shofar, we could answer a very important question. That is, Minhag Yisrael. Do we have any balei toikeah here? Michael, you play the trumpet. Yeah? You're a balei toikeah. What?
Yes.
Yeah, you must be a good one. You play the trumpet, right? No, what do you play? Trumpet. Yeah, well, you got to have the windpipes for that, right? So the minhag is that for Tkiyah Shofar, we cover the shofar at the time of the bracha, which seems to be a halachically problematic custom, because we know that all brachos have to be made over la'asiyasan, immediately prior to performance of the mitzvah. So we don't make the bracha on the tefillin while the tefillin are in the bag. because then it would be too early and it would not be immediately prior to the performance of the mitzvah. But instead we put on the tefillin, we put it on the arm, and right before we're about to tie it, then we make the bracha. In fact, the Ran says, we know, that when somebody marries a woman, they make a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam al ha'arayos v'asar lanu es harusayis v'hitir lanu es hanasuos lanu al yidei chuppah v'kiddushin Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh amo Yisrael al yidei chuppah v'kiddushin. That is a bracha that the Masada Kiddushin makes. He's moitzi the mekadesh, and that is the bracha made when someone is mekadesh al yidei kesef. And the Ran says, why is there no bracha if someone's mekadesh al yidei bia? So the Ran says very simply, because when are you going to do it? Right before the Maisa, it's la yira b'cha ervas davar. So you can't make the bracha then. A bracha has to be made immediately prior to the performance of the mitzvah. So ask the Avnei Nezer, why should shofar be any different? Why do we cover the shofar and then have to take it out of the cover? So we're delaying the proximity of the bracha to the performance of the mitzvah. Says the Avnei Nezer, the reason we cover the shofar is similar to the reason we cover the challah Friday night. Just like we cover the challah Friday night, because we don't want to embarrass the challah, because technically you could be making kiddush on the challah, but you're rejecting the challah for a cheap brand of grape juice, or maybe a cheap brand of wine. So too, technically speaking, the shofar is really just a hammer. The shofar is not really a chavtza shel mitzvah, and that's indicated by the fact that we make lishmaya kol shofar. So we're relegating the shofar to a hammer, to a tool used to create the chavtza. And technically we could have even made the bracha of al tikiyah shofar like Rabbeinu Tam, but we don't, because the shofar is not really that important. So we cover him up because we don't want to embarrass the shofar. The poor little shofar, he's going to turn white, he's going to get embarrassed. The last thing you want to do, Ephraim, would you want to embarrass the shofar? We wouldn't want to embarrass the shofar, right? It's not. Even though the shofar, he could probably stand up to it, but it's better not to embarrass him, especially on Rosh Hashanah.
By the way, the bashar that I was taught is need to be b'chassid the shofar, but to also keep a hand on it while saying the bracha.
Okay, so that's you're dealing with the issue that there's some type of delay, so you want to mitigate that. So even better. So don't cover it. So why are we covering it? So, okay. Now the Rosh brings, in the name of the Rabbi from the Yerushalmi, that the bracha is not like Rabbeinu Tam al tkiyah shofar, but the bracha rather is lishmaya b'kol shofar. And the Bahag also says L'shmaya kol shofar. So it seems like there's a machlokes rishonim. The smag, the shiltis, Rabbeinu Tam, they all say the mitzvah is to blow. The Rambam, the Ravya, the Rosh, they say the mitzvah is to listen. But then the Bahag brings a raya, and the raya is that the mitzvah is to listen, because if you blow in a pit, you're not yoitze. Why? Because you can't hear it. Right? It says the Ravya, the b'shmiyas kol shofar hu yoitze v'lo b'tkiyah shofar. You yoitze by hearing, not by blowing. Kidetnan, like we learned in the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah Chav Zayin Med Beis, hatoikeya l'toich habar, someone who blows in a pit. Lo yatsa, what do you mean? I blew. Why am I not yoitze? Because the mitzvah is not to blow, the mitzvah is to listen. Comes the Maharam El Ashakar, Siman Yud. I heard this from Rav Yonason Sachs, that the Mishnah that says Hatoikea l'toich habar lo yatsa is not conclusive that the mitzvah is to listen. You could really say the mitzvah is to blow. If the mitzvah is to blow, why, if somebody blows in a pit, are they not yotzei? The only thing lacking is the listening. There's nothing lacking in the blowing, so doesn't this indicate the mitzvah is to listen? Says Maram El Shakar, no, not at all. Really, the mitzvah is to blow. But it has to be a blowing that's audible, not a blowing that's inaudible. Haga ba'atzmacha, let's bring the following analogy. Is the mitzvah of Shema to say Shema or to hear the Shema? The mitzvah is to say the Shema. Even though the mitzvah is to say the Shema, but if somebody was koirei balachash and his ears are not able to hear it, you're not yotzei. So even though the mitzvah is to say the Shema, but it has to be a recitation that's audible, likewise, says Maram al Shakar, the mitzvah you could argue is to blow the shofar. The only thing it has to be a blowing that's audible, and in a pit, it's inaudible. Okay, so we don't yet have a conclusive proof to the Shita of the Rambam that the mitzvah is to listen. However, comes the holy Shagas Aryeh, and I had the zuchus recently, this past summer, to be in France, in the city of Metz, on an Erev Shabbos, and we were at the kever of the holy Shagas Aryeh. We were at the Shagas Aryeh's kever. And the Shagas Aryeh asks the following question. A deaf mute, a fool, and a katan cannot be moitzi the rabbim their chiyuv. Wait a second. They can't be yoitzi the rabbim their chiyuv. Question: can a cherei shoyt of a katan build a sukkah for you? Yeah. Because there's no mitzvah to build a sukkah, the mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah. Can a goy build a sukkah for you? Yeah. Sukkah's ganvach kashera, at least Medina de Gemara. Halacha l'maisa, there might be other factors. So, ask the Shagas Aryeh, Bishlama, if the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar was to blow the shofar, I understand why a cherei shoyt of a katan can't be moitzi the chiyuv, because since they're not chayiv in the mitzvah, they can't be moitzi the rabbim in their chiyuv. But that's if the mitzvah is to blow. But if there's no mitzvah to blow, if the mitzvah is merely to hear, and the blowing of the shofar is like the building of the sukkah, it's merely sort of like taking a hammer and creating the item with which you'll go ahead and produce the sound. And by listening to the sound you yotzei the mitzvah, then why would a cherei shoyt of a katan not be yotzei? Bishlam, the mitzvah is to blow, they can't be moitzi you in your obligation to blow. But if the mitzvah is not to blow, the mitzvah is to listen, so then why can't the cherei shoyt of a katan blow and you'll listen? The same way they could build a sukkah for you, they should be able to blow the shofar for you. Comes the Shagas Aryeh, and the Shagas Aryeh says, no. From here, we see that the mitzvah of shofar is not only to listen, like we see from Hatoikeh l'toich habar, but there's also a mitzvah to blow. It's a mitzvah that has two parts. The mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar is to blow the shofar and to hear the sound of the shofar. It's not only dependent on the shmiyah, but it's dependent on the Tkiyah also. That's why if someone is mesasik, lo yatsa. What would the halacha be if somebody went to a speech therapist and the speech therapist said, you need to exercise your mouth muscles. So the guy was exercising his mouth, and he was using the shofar to do it, and he blew 101 sounds, and someone heard, la yatsa. Why not? If the mitzvah is to listen, you should be yotzi. No mitzvah to blow, the mitzvah is just to hear. So I heard. So the Shagas Aryeh comes to the conclusion that the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar is to blow and to listen. Now, how many other mitzvahs are there that have two parts? None. There's no other mitzvah that has two parts. Yet the Shagas Aryeh says this unusual chiddush, that when it comes to shofar, there's a mitzvah to blow and a mitzvah to listen. You need to fulfill both. Now, this is very difficult, because if there was a mitzvah to blow the shofar, then only one person in the shul will be yotzei the mitzvah, the guy who blows. But everyone else, how are they yotzei the mitzvah? You can't be moitzi someone in an act, I can't be your shliach to be mekayim a mitzvah shebegufay. So the Shagas Aryeh is very difficult. We don't have any other parallels of mitzvahs like this. How could somebody be moitzi another? So the Levush says something very unusual. The Levush says, well, if you're a chayre shreita v'katan, it's really dependent on listening. But you're not going to be yotzei from anybody who you hear from, only from someone who's chayiv in the mitzvah. Why? Says Levush. Because if God doesn't want this individual, how could he be mitzi someone else? But that's very difficult. What do you mean, how could he be mitzi someone else? He's not being mitzi anybody. He's not mitzi anyone else. I'm mitzi myself. The mitzvah is to listen. Producing, I have to hear the sound. So the cherishat v'kat is not being mitzi anybody. What does the Levush mean that since Hashem does not want it, how could he be mitzi acherim? Hashem doesn't need to want anything. He's not doing anything. I'm doing everything. The listener is doing everything. So the Chazon Ish and Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, they both say that regarding Tekiyah Shofar, the mitzvah is to listen. Yeah, but to listen to what? Let's say, could I go into shul, and somebody will pull in his BMW into the shul and start honking. You know, could somebody put on an alarm? Oh yeah, why not? I'm listening. The mitzvah is to listen. Yeah, but you have to listen to the sound of the shofar. What if someone pulls in with a harmonica and starts going, you know? I listened. You're not yotzei, because you're right. The mitzvah is to listen, but you have to listen to the sound of a shofar, and it has to be a shofar shel mitzvah. And then only someone who's mechuyev b'davar, only one who's a bar das, has the ability to create the noise that qualifies as shofar shel mitzvah. If someone is not mechuyev b'davar, they can't create the noise that qualifies as tekiyah shel mitzvah. But Rabbi say, here's the real chokehold. This is raised by the Beis it should say, oh yeah, Shas Shus Beis Shlomo Drimmer. And he raises the following question, similar to the Shagas Aryeh, but this is the real chokehold. Okay, so the mitzvah is to listen. And that I see from the fact that if you blow in a pit, lo yatsa. But on the other hand, why can't a cherishat v'katan blow? Well, they can't blow because maybe the Shagasari wants to say, well, blowing is also part of the mitzvah. But Chazon Ish said, no, blowing is not part of the mitzvah. The reason a cherishat v'katan can't blow is they can't produce the tone of a mitzvah. Fine. So what are you going to say about the following case? You ready for this? So the Rambam says somebody, like we said earlier, who's masasek, he just practicing his, somebody plays a trumpet, he doesn't have a trumpet to play, so he's practicing on the shofar. And he happens to produce 101 sounds. So, is he yotzei? No. What do you mean he heard a shofar? No, so then you'll say that's not a shofar shel mitzvah, because the person wasn't mechavein for the mitzvah. Okay, what about as follows? A guy had a daven early on Rosh Hashanah, so he came to shul early, and he needed to blow the shofar. So he blew the shofar. And by the time he got up to the shofar, the whole shul was there already. And they heard him. But he wasn't mechavein to be mitzi them, he was only mechavein to be mitzi himself. What's the halacha? La yatsu. Because in order to be Yotze the mitzvah of Tkiya, the one blowing has to be Mechaven to be Moitzi, the listener, and the listener has to be Mechaven to be Yotze. Why? Why do you have to be Mechaven? What are we missing? If the mitzvah is merely to blow, listen carefully, if the mitzvah is to blow, and the sound of the shofar, is merely the item with which we're Yotze the mitzvah. So I understand the one producing that sound has to be a bar chiyuva. I understand the one producing that sound has to be mechavein, that he's producing the sound of a mitzvah. But why does he have to be mechavein to be moitzi the listener? I understand, according to those who say the mitzvah is to blow, but the Rambam says the mitzvah is to listen. I understand if you want to say according to the Shagas Aryeh, there's a mitzvah to blow and to listen. But the Chazon Ish and Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, they learned the Rambam simply. The mitzvah is merely to listen. And the only reason a Cheirish Shait can't blow is because they have to produce a sound of a mitzvah. Fine! But why does the one who blows have to have in mind the one who's listening? The one who's blowing is not moitzi the listener in anything. Let's say one who builds a sukkah. Does the one who builds a sukkah have to be mechavein when he bangs in the hammer? I'm mechavein to build the sukkah for Pliny. It doesn't have to have anything in mind. And Pliny doesn't have to have in mind to be yotze with the sukkah of the guy who built it, because building the sukkah is merely the preparatory stages needed to create the item of the mitzvah, but it's not part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. So why is there a halacha that the Rambam says in Hilchos Shofar Beis halacha dalid that niskavein shoymei alotze sidei chayvasav niskavein hatokei lo yitziyah? If the listener had in mind, the listener didn't have in mind, lo yatsa. So the Chazon Ish says something very difficult. He says, well, if my friend doesn't have me in mind, so regarding me, it's not the sound of a mitzvah. What is that supposed to mean? He doesn't need to do anything. He's just producing a sound that I listened to. The mitzvah is to listen, so I listened. And the person who created it is a bar chiyuva. And he even had in mind to blow it for a mitzvah, but he's not moitzi you, the mitzvah is listening. This is the question of the Beis Shloimeh. Must be, the Rambam seems not to be correct, he asks. Must be, the mitzvah is to blow. Vade bitkiya talya milsa. He says, even though Cherei Shaita V'Katan, it's somewhat compelling, but for that you could push it off, that you need someone to create a halachic sound of a mitzvah. However, that which you need, Kavanas Mashmiya, is a Raya Brura, like the Shagas Aryeh. Or the way the Avnei Nezer says, just like if listening is the mitzvah, it should be like Sukkah's Ganvach, that even people who are not B'nei Chiyuva are able to make a Sukkah. And someone who listens, who sits in the Sukkah is Yotzei. So too, even if the Tokeh is La Bar Chiyuva, someone who hears from him should be Yotzei. You ready for this, Rabbi Say? This answer I heard from a number of sources. I heard Rabbi Yonason Sachs say this over from Rav Soloveitchik, and it's printed in the Harei Kedem. It's printed in the Sefer Yom HaZikaron of Rabbi Yonason Sachs. So this is attributed to Rabbi Soloveitchik. I heard Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein say this over from the Avnei Nezer. However, I recently found that this is from none other than Reb Chaim Brisker himself, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. Okay? This is Reb Chaim in Reb Chaim's first answer. Moreover, Rav Ruderman would say it over from none other than Rabbi Yisrael Salanter himself. So usually when we come to Rosh Hashanah, we hear Divrei Musar from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. We don't have so much lamdus from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, but this is the definitive take on the mitzvah of Shofar. I'm going to begin by giving you a mashal. You know, a mitzvah has two parts to it. But the two parts are almost always identical, and it will sound like semantics. But a mitzvah has the act of the mitzvah and the fulfillment of the mitzvah. The masa mitzvah and the kiyum ha-mitzvah. The act and the fulfillment. So for example, in most mitzvahs it's simultaneous. The act of tzitzis is wearing the tzitzis. The fulfillment is wearing the tzitzis. The act of tefillin is tying the tefillin. The fulfillment is that the tefillin is tied on you. Usually you can't split the two. And it's academic to even discuss. But let's discuss the following mitzvah, the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. You know, sometimes, actually always, people write commission the writing of a Sefer Torah, and they want to give it to a shul. What are they going to do with it in their house? But they don't want to give it to the shul. I don't know. Maybe one day I'm going to move. I'm going to want to give it to a different shul, or maybe I'm not going to like something the rabbi is going to say, so I'm going to want back my Sefer Torah, or whatever a person's cheshbon is. So they write a shtar that whenever I want, I could take it back. But there's a much more important reason that they have to write a shtar. Because actually, if somebody writes a Sefer Torah and they give it to the shul, they're not yotzei the mitzvah of ksiva Sefer Torah. Did you know that? If you write a Sefer Torah and then you give it to a shul, you've now nullified the fulfillment of your mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is to own it. Once you give it to the shul, you have now spent $100,000 in vain. Because you don't own it anymore. So the mitzvah is to own the Sefer Torah. There's no mitzvah to write the Sefer Torah.
Except according to the Rosh.
Except according to what does the Rosh say? That you have to write it?
You can be yotzei with Sfarim, that mitzvah. It's in Parsha's Vayelech, but the Rambam has a mitzvah Yudches that you have to actually own a Sefer Torah. And the Rosh holds that nowadays, as Manazeh, you can do it with Sfarim.
Yes. So Rabbi Moskowitz is helping me out with the publication of the next edition, and he's giving me a free commercial that even though the Rambam says that the mitzvah is to write the Sefer Torah, yes, the Rosh says that one fulfills the mitzvah by owning Svarim. In fact, Rabbi Moskowitz, the Chafetz Chaim, in his Mitzvahs HaKatzar, quotes the Rosh Halach Lamaisa that by buying Svarim, one is yotzei the mitzvah. Now, I don't know if I have any good deeds on my record, but if I have any, it will be the mitzvah of buying Svarim, and that my wife will attest to. No, forget about. No, I don't know about writing it, Rabbi Moskowitz.
No, it says that. So state.
I know, but the Rosh holds even going to the store and buying the Sefer, you're yotzei the mitzvah. Right. So I'm saying that is one of the few good deeds that I may have. You can ask my wife how I excel in the mitzvah of buying Svarim. Whether you're learning from them, that's that I'm working on. But also, so if anybody wants to help out writing the Sefer to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Ksiva Sefer Torah, shkayach for that, Rabbi Moskowitz. But now we're talking about, let's say, according to the strict view of the Rambam, in terms of the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, the mitzvah is owning it. Okay, because if you give it to the shul, you lost your mitzvah. So you'll say, well, wait a second. If the mitzvah is to own it, what if a person's father commissioned the writing of a Sefer Torah, and then the person inherited it? Are they mekayim the mitzvah of ksiva Sefer Torah? Nope. You don't get the mitzvah. So that seems to indicate the mitzvah is to write it. So the mitzvah is to write it. Why can't I write it and give it to the shul? You hear the chokehold over here? We have a very big dilemma by Ksiva Sefer Torah. If the mitzvah is to write it, why can't I write it and give it to the shul? Oh no, the mitzvah is to own it. The mitzvah is to own it. Then why am I not Yoitzi if I inherited the Sefer Torah of my father? Comes Avnei Nezer, and the Avnei Nezer says that let's iron out exactly what's the mitzvah of Sefer Torah. The mitzvah is to own it. But that's the fulfillment of the mitzvah. That's the kiyum ha-mitzvah. But the act of the mitzvah is to write it. The act of the mitzvah is to write it. The fulfillment is to own it. I could have someone do an act for me. I cannot have someone do a fulfillment for me. So I could hire a sofer. I commission him to write it. And if I own it, I get the mitzvah. If my father commissioned the writing, or if my father wrote it, and I inherited it, then all I did is own it, I don't get the mitzvah, because it's missing an act. There's no act. I own it without an act. If I wrote it and I give it to the shul, I did an act, but I don't have a fulfillment because I don't own it. So actually, now we're learning that there's a new concept, and this was really something that Rav Soloveitchik opened up. Namely, a mitzvah has two parts to it. There's the act of the mitzvah and the fulfillment of the mitzvah. In most instances, it's simultaneous. So the act of tefillin is tying the tefillin. The fulfillment is it being tied on you. The act of tzitzis is putting it on. The fulfillment is wearing it. It's simultaneous. It's semantic. It's the same thing. By Sefer Torah, the act is writing it. The fulfillment is owning it. So they say, really? So then, when I go to Ksiva Sefer Torah and I fill in a letter, what mitzvah am I doing? You're doing the mitzvah of making the guy who paid $100,000 feel good that you took a picture with him. That's the only good deed you're doing. You get no schar for Ksivas Sefer Torah. You're better off going to the store, buying the Magid or Akir for $25, then you get the mitzvah of Ksivas Sefer Torah. Or any book you want. Fine, that was an unabashed plug for my book. You could buy whatever sefer you want, but filling in a letter in the Sefer Torah, you don't get any mitzvah. The mitzvah of Sefer Torah is owning a Sefer Torah that came through an act. So comes Rav Soloveitchik, and I found that Reb Chaim Brisker says this black and white in the Chidushei Hagrach al Hashas Hasholem, page Tzadi Zayin. But Rav Soloveitchik and the Rav Shachter talks about this in his Svarim, and Rabbi Sachs speaks about it, and this is already in the Grach. Rabbi Yerucham Oshin in the Yorech L'Moyadim Yom Naram Chelek Aleph, page Kuf Mem Basic Kuf Mem Gimel. So any yeshiva you come from, any of the great Lamdanim in the full spectrum say this Chiddush. From, you name it, okay? Be it Rabbi Yerucham Oshin, be it Rav Ruderman, be it Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Shurkin, Rav Shachter, they all say the following Chiddush. There is no machlokes between the Smag and the Rambam. The Rambam talks about the mitzvah of listening to the shofar. The Smag talks about the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. There's an act of the mitzvah and there's a fulfillment of the mitzvah. The act is blowing it, the fulfillment is listening to it. If you blow in a pit and you didn't hear it, you're not able to fulfill the mitzvah. The fulfillment is listening. But if we ask that the fulfillment is listening, why can't the Cheresh Shoit V'Katan blow it? The answer is because the blowing is the Maisa mitzvah. In order to perform a halachically recognizable act of a mitzvah, you need to be a bar chiyuva. Moreover, in order to transfer the maisa from the blower to the listener, the blower has to be mechavein to be yotzei the listener. Not in be moitzi him in the fulfillment, but to be moitzi him in the act. I could be moitzi you in acts. I can't be moitzi you in fulfillments. So Rabbi Yerucham Oshin asks, in number 33, Well then, if blowing the shofar is a critical part of the mitzvah, then why would the Rambam, well, it's not, I have to update the sheet, it's not on the sheet. Why would the Rambam, if blowing the shofar is a critical part of the mitzvah, then why would the Rambam paskin that if you steal a shofar, it's not a mitzvah haba ba'avera? L'chayra, the shofar now is critical. That's the act of the mitzvah. So Rabbi Yerucham says it has to be the mitzvah haba ba'avera destroys fulfillments, it doesn't destroy acts. And let me read to you what Rabbi Chaim Brisker said. B'shem hagrach zatzal b'tekiya shofar hatekiya himase ha-mitzvah v'hashemiya hikiyom ha-mitzvah. The Grach would ask, if the Rambam holds listening is the mitzvah, why does the Tekeh have to be mechavti moitzi l'shomeya? And the answer is, even though the kiyom is the shmiya, the ma'isa mitzvah is the tekiya. Comes Rav Ruderman and he says that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would also view the mitzvah of shofar in this light. And Rabbi Yisrael would teach that this actually has halachic ramifications, and that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would declare before the blowing of the shofar that everyone should be mechavein, to be mekayim, the mitzvah of shmias kol shofar, and everyone should have in mind that the act of blowing should be transferred to them as well. So you should have in mind both of these things, which is really the chidush that we're saying from Reb Chaim and Avnei Nezer and Reb Soloveitchik, namely that even though the fulfillment is listening, the act of blowing is the act of the mitzvah, and that has to be transferred al yedei kavana. Now, Rav Sachs said over that the machlokes between Rabbeinu Tam and the Ravya of whether the bracha is al tkiyah shofar or is the bracha al shmias shofar, that is not a machlokes what the mitzvah is. Everyone agrees the fulfillment is listening. The act is blowing. But the question is, when we formulate a bracha, do we formulate the bracha on the act of the mitzvah or on the fulfillment of the mitzvah? Normally, they happen simultaneously. And when they happen simultaneously, we usually formulate the bracha on the fulfillment of the mitzvah. However, in this case, since they don't happen simultaneously, typically, here I'll give you an example. Here I'll give you a very good example. We know that when it comes to Sfiras HaOmer, the opinion of the Bahag is that it's one long mitzvah, and if you miss one day, you blow the whole thing. So the Sefer HaMachriya, one of the Rishonim, asks that no, it has to be separate mitzvahs, because it was only one mitzvah, and it was ma'akev, so then why do you make a bracha every single night? You should make only one bracha. If the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer is one long mitzvah, so we should only make one bracha. So the Brisker Rav says, okay, I understand. It's one long, really I'll tell you like the Bahag, it's one long mitzvah. That is, the fulfillment is one long mitzvah. But there are 49 different acts of the mitzvah. You still have to count every night. When you count every night, then we fulfill it when you've counted all 49 nights. And when Chazal are mekayim, when Chazal formulate a bracha, they formulate the bracha on the Maisa mitzvah, not on the fulfillment of the mitzvah. However, that's the Brisker Rav. That really, I'll tell you that the Bahag is correct, that the mitzvah is to count, the mitzvah to count all 49 days. It's one long mitzvah, but the bracha is formulated on the act, and the act is daily. So this seems to indicate that Chazal formulate a bracha based on the act of the mitzvah. That's why Rabbeinu Tam says the bracha should be al tikiyas shofar. Al tikiyas shofar. Another example. Let's say I put up a mezuzah on your house. Right, very often somebody will invite a rabbi to put up a mezuzah, and the rabbi puts up a mezuzah. What's the rabbi doing? Putting up a mezuzah. It's not the rabbi's house. It's not the rabbi's mezuzah. Why is the rabbi making the bracha? The answer is the fulfillment of the mitzvah of mezuzah is by living in a house that has a mezuzah. But the act of the mitzvah is putting up the mezuzah, and someone could do an act for another person. And the mitzvah is, the bracha is likbaya mezuzah. That's not the fulfillment of the mitzvah. The fulfillment is being the resident in a house that has a mezuzah. Putting up the mezuzah is the act, but the bracha is formulated based on the act. So therefore Rabbeinu Tam argues, even though the mitzvah is not to blow the shofar, the mitzvah is to listen to the shofar, but the bracha is formulated al tkiyas shofar. And the Rav Yos says no. That's when the act and the fulfillment happen at two different times. But when the act and the fulfillment are simultaneous, then the formulation of the bracha will be based on the fulfillment and not based on the act. So bottom line is, when it comes to the mitzvah of shofar, the mitzvah is to listen to the sound of the shofar. That's the fulfillment of the mitzvah. But the act of the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. Okay, Marv Rabbi Sai, that's what we have for our last year of Tavshin Pei Beis. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us the health, the strength, the siyat d'shmaya. We should come together for Limud Torah for another year. Tavshin Pei Gimel, b'siyat d'shmaya, agut gezunt yar, ksivach sima tova. All the best to everybody. Baruch Tia.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, svara that you could transfer over
Yeah.
act the covenant.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.